March 17, 1944. Atlantic coast, near Royan, France. The wind from the sea was quiet that night, almost warm, as Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartwig stepped out of the bunker and lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. It wasn't fear. It was the cold. Or maybe the silence. Silence like that only came before something broke. Behind him, inside the reinforced concrete, the other men laughed. They were winning at cards. One slapped the table and shouted, "Another round!" Another bragged that he hadn't seen an American plane in 3 nights. Hartwig exhaled smoke and stared at the dark waves. His shift had ended, but he couldn't sleep. Not lately. A voice called from the lookout tower above. "All clear. Not even a recon flight." Hartwig smiled, just slightly. Then muttering to no one, "Let them come at night. No American pilot is that reckless." He said it with confidence and a hint of pride. The coastal battery, buried under layers of sand and brush, was his domain. 4 heavy guns, invisible from the air, perfectly aligned to obliterate any landing craft daring to approach from the west. Allied bombers had tried twice in the past month. They hit nothing. They always missed. They always came in the day. "They're cowards after sunset," someone laughed earlier that night. Hartwig had agreed, until now, because somewhere, far above, beyond the clouds, beyond the stars he could not see, the hum of a single engine cut through the dark like a whisper wrapped in thunder. He didn't hear it yet, but he would. And when he did, it would be too late. The German 8.8 cm coastal battery at Royan didn't exist on any Allied map. Not really. Old reconnaissance photos showed nothing more than dunes and trees. Nothing alarming. Just empty shoreline west of Bordeaux, with occasional silhouettes that could have been driftwood or rocky outcrops. But what lay beneath was far more deadly. By winter of 1943, German engineers had buried 4 heavy artillery pieces in concrete pits, reinforced by steel and disguised beneath nets of sand-colored cloth. Every barrel was measured and aligned to sweep any beach approach with explosive fire. Every trench was carved by forced labor. Every supply route was timed to the second. It was not a fortress, it was a trap. And the men who manned it, Luftwaffe gunners reassigned from flak units, believed they were invincible. Lieutenant Hartwig, transferred from Bremen in late January, had called it a sleeping dragon. His superiors called it Battery König. American planners didn't even know it had a name. Inside the bunkers, the walls were damp with salt. Radios crackled. Operators played music when they were off duty. Forbidden, but tolerated. It gave rhythm to the night. It drowned out the boredom. And it lulled them into the most dangerous illusion a soldier can have, the feeling of safety. By early March, routine had returned. Spotting reports came in. Bomber formations to the east, scattered dogfights over Normandy. Nothing local. Allied forces had shifted their focus. The Germans believed the Royan sector was safe. Forgotten, even. The coastal battery received supplies every Thursday. Fuel, crates of ammunition, and bread, always stale but warm. That meant someone in the rear cared. That meant the line still mattered. They took pride in that. In the control bunker, Sergeant Vogel pinned a sketch to the wall, a cartoon of an American pilot with a blindfold and a cane. The caption, "Another lucky miss." Everyone laughed. The sketch stayed there for 2 weeks. They'd look at it every morning, until one morning, It wasn't there anymore, because the wall had been blown away. But for now, in the early hours of March 17th, the battery sat silent, ready, invisible, waiting for a war it thought it had already outsmarted. It was Private Eric Maul's third week on coastal watch. At 19, he had never fired his weapon outside of drills. His hands still shook when he handled live rounds. Not from fear, or at least not the kind he could name. It was more like a vibration under the skin, a quiet warning. His shift began at 2200 hours. Just him, a headset, and the sea. 2 nights ago, he'd noticed something strange. "Sir, I think I heard an engine." Sergeant Vogel didn't even look up from his radio log. "You always hear engines." "No, really. It came low, fast. Then it vanished." "A gull farts louder than the Americans at night," the sergeant had laughed. But Maul had written it down in his notebook anyway. A leather-bound ledger his mother gave him before he left Hamburg. March 15th, 2:48. Sound, faint engine. Not wind, not ours. Tonight, it came again. Same time, same pattern. A single pulse in the sky. Then silence. He leaned forward against the edge of the lookout window, squinting into the darkness. Nothing moved. No flares. No moonlight. Only the invisible reach of ocean and cloud. And yet the hum lingered. Not in the air. In his bones. He reached for the headset. "Central Post. This is Tower 3. Requesting confirmation of possible aircraft. Grid Y-17. Pause. Static. A cough. "Negative. Sector clear." "Copy that." But Maul didn't lower the receiver right away. He kept holding it, as if waiting for something more, for someone else to admit it. Behind him, the bunker light flickered. A loose bulb, always loose. He could hear Hartwig's voice through the stone, low, confident, finishing a cigarette and talking about rations. Then the laughter came again, cards slapped on tables, men who believed the night sky was theirs. Maul stepped back to his chair, eyes never leaving the window, and in his notebook he wrote one more line. March 17th, Rue per 11. Sound closer. Still alone? I am not wrong. Captain William Overstreet Jr. had already been warned once. 2 weeks ago, he flew under a bridge in occupied Paris to chase a fleeing Messerschmitt against all protocol. The kill was clean. The chewing out lasted an hour. "Damn it, Overstreet," the colonel had barked. "You're not a cowboy. You're a pilot. Follow the mission or find another war." Overstreet just smiled. "Yes, sir." But he never liked maps drawn by people who'd never seen the ground. Tonight he sat on the wing of his P-51 Mustang, parked at an auxiliary field near Cognac. The engine was cold, the air thick with fog, and the metallic scent of fuel. Inside his flight jacket pocket was a folded intelligence memo. It said, "Sector Z off limits after 22. High risk of radar net. No flights authorized." But it was something else that caught his eye. A series of old recon images. Low quality, misaligned. But he saw it. A perfect crescent of sand near Royan. Unchanged for months. No movement. No damage. Too perfect. His gut twisted. He'd seen something like it before, in North Africa. A fake oasis that turned out to be a battery, nearly cost him his left leg. He reached into his duffel and pulled out a set of civilian relief maps, the kind geologists used, not the army. 1 ridge, 2 blind spots. just enough space to hide something. He zipped his jacket. No flight plan, no wingman, just instinct. By 0120, the Mustang's engine roared to life. A mechanic sprinted from the barracks, shouting, waving a wrench. Overstreet didn't even glance down. He throttled hard and lifted into the fog. On the ground, the commander of the airfield cursed into the phone. He's gone rogue again. Alone. But the voice on the other end didn't yell. It said only this: let him go. Back in France, above the Atlantic, Overstreet leveled out. A single fighter, no orders, no backup. Just stars, clouds, and the quiet hum of a plane chasing its own war. He dipped lower, toward the edge of a coast nobody dared fly over, toward the silence that had gone undisturbed. Until now. At 2:14 a.m., the first explosion tore through the sand like a thunderclap from God. The coastal battery didn't see it coming, didn't hear the approach, just the sudden bone-shaking burst, a crater where the radio shack used to be. Private Moll was thrown from his chair. The sky, once velvet black, now pulsed with orange light and roaring flame. Camouflage nets, lit like paper. A second explosion followed, precise, surgical, right on top of the fuel depot. Sirens wailed. Shouts echoed down the bunkers. Boots scrambled on gravel. Sergeant Vogel was already yelling into a dead handset. I need confirmation. Is this artillery? Is it naval? No, Moll gasped, pointing to the fire trails in the sky. It's a plane. One. Just one. A shriek of engine, high-pitched, unmistakable, and then it came into view. Low, silver, cutting across the coastal fog like a blade made of wind and fire. Pa 50 Mustang. The same one they had seen in posters and propaganda, but never this close. Never alone. Impossible, Hartwig whispered. He has no support. The Mustang circled once. It did not strafe randomly. It didn't hesitate. It moved like a hunter, quick, deliberate, lethal. The next pass took out the eastern gun mount. Flames spewed from the hatch. The metal groaned like it was alive. One of the gunners screamed, a sound that cut through Moll's ribs. And still, no one returned fire. The flak batteries were silent. Ammunition crews were stunned, crawling from bunkers, blinking at a nightmare that made no sense. The battery had never been attacked at night, because no one was supposed to find them. And yet here it was, death in the shape of a rogue pilot, unraveling months of planning in minutes. One more turn, one more flash, and then nothing. Silence. Smoke rolled in. The Mustang was gone, but the sky still burned. And the cartoon on the wall, the one of the blindfolded American, now hung crooked, scorched at the edges. Moll looked at it, then he tore it down. The flames burned for hours. From the outside, the bunker complex still looked untouched, but inside, everything had changed. 3 of the 4 primary gun positions were destroyed. The 4th had no targeting control. The radio array was gone. The comms shack melted. The reserve fuel drums had ignited and sent liquid fire pouring into the trenches. The smell of scorched rubber and cooked metal drifted through the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Lieutenant Hartwig stood in the doorway of what was left of the command post, staring down at a mangled, blackened desk. The map on top was ash. The mug he had set down just hours earlier was shattered, coffee pooling with blood. He hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. Behind him, a corporal tried to connect the emergency field radio. Nothing but static. Every time he turned the crank, the sound made Moll wince. "Sir," the corporal whispered. "What?" What do we do? Hartwig didn't answer. He was staring at something in the sand, a trail where the Mustang's final rocket had carved a line into the earth like a signature. A name written in fire. From deeper in the tunnel came Vogel's voice. We were never supposed to be found. How did they know? How did one man know? Hartwig shook his head. He wasn't thinking about radar, or maps, or reconnaissance. He was thinking about something more terrifying. Something he could not control. Initiative. That one pilot had seen through the deception, chosen to come, chosen to strike. Without orders, without a squadron, without permission. And he had succeeded. A crash of metal. Someone kicked a toolbox in rage. Another man sobbed openly in the corner, his face buried in his hands. We're blind, Vogel muttered. They can hit us any time they want. No, Hartwig replied softly. Not they. Him. He looked up at the black sky. Smoke still curled into the stars. They only needed one. Captain Overstreet landed at 0337. The Mustang's right wing dragged sparks across the concrete. Hydraulic fluid bled from the undercarriage. The nose was scorched, chipped, but it flew home, just barely. He popped the canopy and slid out, boots hitting the tarmac with a thud. A ground crewman ran up, wide-eyed. What the hell happened up there? Overstreet didn't answer. He just pulled off his helmet, dropped it onto the wing, and stared west toward Royan. He didn't speak until the commanding officer arrived. Colonel Miles crossed the field with 2 MPs in tow. His face was tight, unreadable. Orders had been clear, no solo flights into the blackout zone. Overstreet saluted. I disobeyed, sir. Miles held the stare, long, silent. Then he said, and there's a battery west of Royan. Hidden, not anymore. One of the MPs blinked. Colonel Miles didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. You're grounded until further notice. Yes, sir. The colonel turned to leave, then paused. You hit fuel stores? Yes, sir. Gun positions? 3, maybe 4. No radar left. Miles nodded almost imperceptibly. You disobey orders again, he muttered. I'll have you teaching mechanics in Kansas. Then softer, but damn good flying. As Overstreet walked back to the barracks, a young pilot called out, Did you get lost? He stopped, looked back. No, Overstreet said. I found something. The next morning, the photos came in. Reconnaissance captured Royan's coastline from 18,000 feet. Scorched marks. Black smears where bunkers used to be. A single, strange arc burned into the sand. The final pass of a Mustang flying just above treetop. At Division HQ, a German officer flipped through the prints in disbelief. He pointed to the attack pattern. This wasn't a raid, he muttered. This was a signature. Beside him, Major Eberhardt, a logistics officer from Berlin, tapped the table and whispered to his aide, If even one of them acts like this, how do we predict anything? No one answered, because they all knew the truth now. The Americans didn't just have better machines. They had men who made their own war. 3 days later, in a windowless room outside Paris, German analysts pored over the damage reports from Royan. The conclusion was chilling, not just because of what was hit, but how. The Mustang hadn't strafed at random. It had struck the battery's weakest points: fuel, communication, and control. Not a single round wasted on decoy structures. Not one pass-off target. Major Eberhardt demanded answers. How did one man find a ghost battery in the dark, without maps, without radar, and without orders? The theory was sabotage, espionage, a leak. But the truth was worse. In London, the Allies already had a name for it: terrain-informed strike selection. Overstreet's raid hadn't been blind luck. It came from data, real data. Not classified, not military, but civilian. U.S. engineers, working with free access to European geological surveys, had built a layered relief map of the Atlantic coast using photography, old trade records, even postcards from before the war. The elevation models were run through projection overlays by civilian mathematicians. One of them, a university professor from Michigan, noticed a shape in Royan's dunes that suggested unnatural leveling, a signature of construction. The report had been shared informally. Overstreet got it from a weather officer who moonlighted as a cartographer. None of it came through the chain of command. It came through freedom. Freedom to see. Freedom to question. Freedom to act. And it revealed something the Germans never anticipated. Information flow in the American system wasn't linear. It was lateral, shared, tested, rebuilt, and sometimes used by a pilot no one gave permission to. In contrast, German intelligence was rigid, hierarchical, filtered through fear and doctrine. Engineers who saw anomalies were afraid to speak. Clerks filed contradictions into bins marked "Revisit after victory." The pilot didn't need a squadron. He had the minds of 1,000 strangers, and the result was precise devastation. Major Eberhardt circled the damage radius on the recon photo. Then, under his breath, he said, "This is what happens when a nation lets its soldiers think." In a cafe in Dayton, Ohio, 2 years before that night in Royan, a young engineer scribbled notes on a napkin. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't under orders. He was on a lunch break. The topic? How to build a fighter that climbed faster, turned sharper, and flew farther than anything else in the air. That napkin sketch became part of the P-51 Mustang's wing design. By the time Overstreet took off in March of 1944, that napkin had already been passed through 10 factories, redrawn by union draftsmen, stress-tested in wind tunnels, funded by local taxes, and riveted into aluminum by women named Grace and Rita, who'd never set foot outside Nebraska. Every screw, every seal, every gallon of fuel in his aircraft came from a system the Germans couldn't understand, because it didn't begin in war rooms. It began in classrooms, machine shops, and yes, cafes. The Germans believed in control, tight hierarchy. One directive, one result. But the Americans? They believed in modularity. One plant made valves, another made frames. A third just tested canopy glass for impact shatter. No single point of failure, because every part was replaceable, every idea remixable. When the war began, Nazi Germany assigned their best minds to weapons the Führer wanted. America let their best minds build what they believed was needed, whether or not it made sense to command. That's how the P-51 was born. Not in a bunker, but in a democracy. Overstreet's Mustang didn't just fly on fuel and steel. It flew on freedom, messy, unpredictable, wildly inefficient at times, but capable of creating something unstoppable. And that's why, when his wing cut through the sky over Royan, it moved like nothing the Germans had ever seen, because it wasn't built to follow orders. It was built to win. By spring of 1944, the United States was producing one P-51 Mustang every 63 minutes. 63. The Germans knew this in theory. They saw the charts, the reports. But they didn't feel it. Until Royan. Until one of those Mustangs appeared at night, alone, and made an entire coastal battery vanish. Major Eberhard called for a new estimate. "How many do they have in theater?" he asked. The intelligence officer paused. We're not sure. They keep rotating squadrons. Every time we count, they double." Eberhard said nothing, just stared at the ceiling. Across the ocean, the U.S. had opened over 500 airfields, built by civilian contractors, staffed by teenagers, manned by pilots who could request air support and get it delivered within hours, because fuel wasn't rationed by fear, but measured by what the mission demanded. One general had said it best: "We don't count gallons, we count outcomes." In contrast, the German coastal battery near Royan had received its last fuel shipment 9 days before the raid. 6 barrels. Not enough to fire every gun for more than a few minutes. Not enough to reposition. Not enough to survive. 1 man, 1 Mustang, 1 night. That's all it took to expose the imbalance. The Allies didn't win with better pilots. They won with better questions. Who needed centralized control when you had a nation willing to give a rogue pilot the tools and the trust to act? At an Army base in Kansas, a chalkboard listed the breakdown. P-51 Mustangs built to date, 15,875. Fuel shipped to Europe weekly, 28 million gallons. Average American pilot flight time before deployment, 240 hours. Average German recruit, 90. The Mustang wasn't just a plane. It was a statement that if you let a free society organize chaos, it could outproduce, outthink, and outfly any regime built on fear. Back in the bunker at Royan, Hartwig finally understood. The Mustang hadn't broken through their defenses. It had revealed that there were never any defenses to begin with. Years later, long after the war, Friedrich Hartwig sat on a bench in Bremen, coat buttoned high, hands folded stiff in his lap. The reporter asked politely, "Do you remember Royan?" Hartwig didn't speak at first. He just nodded. "I remember the light. That kind of light doesn't belong to this world." He paused, eyes unfocused. It wasn't a bombing run. It wasn't even vengeance. It was surgical, personal. That pilot didn't just find us. He understood us. He knew exactly where to strike. The reporter, a young American, leaned forward. "How did that make you feel?" Hartwig let out a slow breath, like I was standing in the wrong century. Then he told the story, the whole thing. How the Mustang came from nowhere. How their battery never fired a shot. How a single wing, dipped just above the ridge, gleamed under the flames like polished steel. "It looked," Hartwig said softly, "like a knife made of stars." The old man grew quiet. "There were 4 of us who survived. We crawled into the crater. The air was hot. The smoke burned your eyes. And still, we waited for more. We thought there would be squadrons, bombers, waves." He shook his head, but none came, just him, and then he was gone. He looked at the reporter, not bitter, not quite. "You know what frightened us most?" Hartwig asked. "Not that he disobeyed. Not that he hit every target." "No?" "No," Hartwig whispered. "It was that he was allowed to." He stood slowly, bones creaking. The Reich would have court-martialed a man like that. The reporter asked, "And your side?" Hartwig gave a tired smile. "We lost." He took a few steps down the path. Then, without turning back, they flew alone, but they flew free.